Thank you for being here this morning. I want to welcome those also that are that are watching us online here this morning. I want to ask you a question. How many of you, the last 6 months, they've been tough? Anybody? Be honest with you. Say the last 6 months. This has kind of been brutal. So you got all of this. Now we got the smoke and the fires. And here's what I thought of. Imagine going through all of this without the Lord. There are millions and millions of people all across the globe, but more so kind of in our location in the Bay Area here, that are going through exactly what you're going through, but they don't have the Lord to sustain them through this. And I was just overwhelmed with gratitude this morning that God would be good to us in saving us, and we desire that message to go out to a world all around us. But be thankful that He's there every step of the way for you, and that He is enough, and that He can sustain you through this time. I'd like for you to take your Bibles and turn to Deuteronomy chapter number 6. Deuteronomy chapter number 6. Our friends, Dustin and Mindy Moore, they're friends of our personal friends, as well as friends of our ministry. They have ministered to us over the last several years here to our church. They were actually scheduled to be with us in June this past year, but of course with COVID, that all had to be rescheduled for another year in the future. But early on this week, we found out that he and his wife, they both have COVID, and they're doing fine, but they've, of course, Ravenswood had to go kind of back onto an online format for the next several weeks. And Dustin asked if I would be available to record a message for him and for them to be able to play it this morning. And I'm thankful for Pastor Mike willing to take on even that extra workload this week to prepare a video sermon with all of the editing and the verses for them. And the Lord impressed upon my heart to preach the same message, although tweaked it much for our church, to you here this morning. And my prayer is that God will work in our hearts. Hopefully you're there at Deuteronomy chapter 6. But I want to read a verse that's found in 1 Peter. And it's a verse that is familiar for us. It says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." In other words, always be ready to give an answer to those that are observing your life, that are seeing your life, and when they begin to ask questions of what is, what's the difference? How are you making through it? And obviously, if you apply it to COVID, everything that's going on, the fires, job loss, financial loss, that how are you staying positive to where you can still sing unto the Lord like we just did? And so in Deuteronomy chapter number 6, we're going to begin reading in verse number 4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And when thy son," jump down to verse number 20, sorry. "And when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, What mean the testimonies, and the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord our God hath commanded you, then thou shalt say unto thy son, We were Pharaoh's bondmen in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand." And so this morning, I want to bring a message that I entitled, "When you are asked, tell them why." When you are being observed, when others are seeing your life and they begin to ask questions, I want to encourage you to tell them why. I have a super, super long introduction that's got many points, okay? Before I get to the actual message, which has one point, and it's kind of at the very end. But I want you to stick with me here this morning. I'm going to try to preach as quickly as I can. I know that that the smoke is kind of rolling in, and I think I think it might even get worse throughout the course of the morning and the afternoon. So I do want to be cognizant of that. But when you love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, one would begin to maybe ask the question, well, what will the impact be upon my relationships? What will the impact be maybe upon my family? What will the impact be if if I extend myself in glorifying God, if serving Him with my life in a day that literally is tearing Jesus' name down, where living for Christ is not popular, where doing the right thing is literally called wrong, and where doing wrong is called right. If I live for God, if I love Him with all of my heart, with all of my soul, and with all of my might, what kind of impact is that going to have on the relationships in which God has placed my life in? Those are really, really good questions, and especially for any parent that is here this morning. You love the Lord, and you want to serve Him in the capacities in which God has placed you in, and you want your life to glorify God, but what is this going to do for my family? What's this going to do for my relationships and my friends? And there's real tension between the two of glorifying God or pleasing man. And it truly is a tension that all of us weigh in our daily lives. And so are you going to love your family and your children, and certainly you want to be a good mom and you want to be a good dad, but what does it look like in the day in which we live to love the Lord radically and still have wonderful relationships? And how will this impact those around us? But it's very significant here in our text that Moses, right after he says, I want you to love the Lord with all of your heart, throughout the course of chapter number 6, he immediately begins to describe the impact that it's going to have on the relationships in your life. And so hear me, far from trying to destroy your relationships this morning, far from trying to destroy your family, I want you to see from Scripture today that if you do indeed choose to love and live for the Lord in a radical 2020, so a counterculture in our world, that it will actually indeed be a blessing to your relationships and to your family. And so the best way to serve those that you love, the best way to love the people that are in your life is indeed to live radically for the Lord. And so here's the principle here this morning, right off the bat. Love the Lord first, and the relationships in your life will be blessed. Love the relationships, the people in your life over the Lord, and those relationships, your family will suffer. So that's the principle. Heavy, law-driven right off the bat, but I promise you I'll rescue you by the end of the message. And so I want us to see how this plays out in our text, just kind of practically in our life. I want you to see here as we kind of go back into our text, just the great irony of what happens when you put your family first. So what Moses is doing here, he's speaking to a new generation of God's people. They're on the verge of the promised land. He's brought them out close to the Jordan River. They can look over the Jordan River and they can see the promised land that is flowing with milk and honey. But see, 40 years earlier, God had called these individuals' parents to do the very same thing. And many of us, if you've grown up in church, you know the story. The spies, they went out and they came back with a report. Some was evil, some was good. The majority of it was an evil report. They said, hey, the land is good, but there's giants in the land. The land is awesome, but there's these massive fortified cities with armies of just gnarly people. There's giants over there. And then when these parents, of course, heard the report some 40 years earlier, they turned back and they wandered in the desert for 40 years. But I want you to ask yourself this question: why'd they make that decision? Why'd they refuse to go up into Canaan? I think there are a myriad of different reasons that one might say, I'm not going to go into Canaan, but we are given this amazing insight into what they were thinking of why they made the decision that they made some 40 years earlier. Moses is retelling the story, but in Deuteronomy chapter 1, why don't you turn there real quick or click there, whatever you need to do to get to Deuteronomy chapter number 1. I want you to see this. We're given insight into what was going on in their minds. Verse number 39 of Deuteronomy chapter number 1, it says, Moreover, your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, and your children, which in that day had no knowledge between good and evil, they shall go in thither, and unto them will I give it, and they shall possess it. But the parents, what they were thinking is that, hey, there's spies in the land. The spies have gone in. There's giants in the land. There's these huge fortified cities. I got to put my children first. There's far too great of a risk if we live for God in 2020, if we radically proclaim Jesus Christ, if we try to gather a huge group and go down to the courthouse in Redwood City and say, Jesus Christ is everything in my life. Could you imagine? We ought to do it. But there's great fear with that, with the world in which we live in. And so they're looking, and their parents some 40 years earlier, they saw the giants, they saw the fortified cities, and you know what they thought of? They thought of their children. I can understand that. I actually can kind of be sympathetic towards that. It's dangerous. It's scary. I don't want to take them over there. We cannot do what God says because we have children, so they put their children first. We're thousands of years later, and we look back, and let's be careful to not look into the text and to judge these individuals, because I do it regularly, just played out differently in the Johnson home in 2020. But we know the result. The children that they tried to protect, they spent the largest portion of their prime years literally wandering in the desert. So here's the great irony. If the parents had put put the Lord first, all of these children, they would have grown up in a land flowing with milk and honey. If they would have put the Lord first. But instead, they put God first, and they squandered and they wandered in the desert for 40 years, those prime years, and then everybody that would have been literally probably, believe 13 years and older, all of them would have died in the wilderness. And that's the great irony. The parents put the children first, and it was devastating for the children. Yes, if they had got into the land, they most likely would have maybe lost a daughter or a son, maybe in battle or in something like that. But the end result was here that they all suffered because they put their family first. Listen, what I'm speaking on today is counterculture in our world today. So obedience, it always has a cost for sure. But I want you to not only see the kind of the irony, but I want to challenge you to not live for anybody other than Christ. Don't live for your relationships. Don't live for your spouse. Don't live for your children. Because the best way that you can serve that relationship, the best way that you can serve your spouse, the best way that you can serve your children is by loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. It's true of marriage. It's true of friendship. It's true of parenting. Let me talk to the married people in here out here for a moment. Who should be first in that relationship? What I'm about to say for the next few moments, it goes against what's pumped into every single Hallmark movie and really just every romantic movie that is out there. Can I encourage you, wives, to not ask of your husband to place you first in their life? Husbands, can I encourage you to not ask your wife to place you first in their life? Christ is the only one that deserves that position. Because listen, when Christ is the very heartbeat and the very of who we are, if we love Him with all of our soul, with all of our might, we will love our spouses even when they are unlovely. Here's what I know. Marriage, man, sometimes it can leave a wake of carnage. You want to know why? Because you got two people that are sinners trying to do life together. And you know what? That's hard. There's a lot of grind with that. But if you will allow your spouse to put Christ first, they will be able to love you well, even when you sin against them. Let's not place them on the throne of our hearts and in our lives. Listen, that is only meant for God. When we do that, we're putting so much pressure on the shoulders of our spouses that they would never be able to bear that. We don't have the capacity to be God. How about children? Children, I've got two myself. How much should we love them? Well, of course, we ought to love them radically, but the same principle holds true in parenting. When the first commandment says, you shall have no other gods before you, well, that includes even our children. That's why the Lord was able to say in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, he that loveth father or mother more than me, is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Man, people read that and hear that, and how in the world could Jesus make such a radical statement? All Jesus is simply doing is that he's applying the first commandment. Because if we allow our children to take first place in our hearts, if we allow our children to take first place in our lives, if we allow them to have first claim over our money, you know what we've made our children? We've made them an idol. And as we've placed them up as an idol and we serve them and they have our hearts and they have our attentions more than God does, you know what we're actually teaching our children by trying to put them first, by trying to love them in the way that we think that we ought to? You know what we're telling them? We're telling them that you're a little idol and that you ought to actually worship yourself. And so let's be careful with this. We ought to not teach them to worship themselves. Satan, in his first interactions with man and their relationship with God, he comes into the Garden of Eden and he says, man, look what happened. If you will simply eat of this tree, the day that you eat thereof, your eyes will be opened. And what did Satan tell them? You will be like a god. You will be worthy now of worship. And the flattery for Adam and Eve, that caused them to lose paradise. It caused them to lose what was best for them. It caused them to enter into suffering. And obviously we all have entered into that suffering as well. And so let's not place our spouse on a place that they could never fulfill. Let's not place a friend. Let's not place a relationship. Let's not place a job. Let's not place anything up onto the throne of our hearts where God supreme should have. And if we will love him with all of our hearts, with all of our soul, with all of our mights, the relationships around us indeed will be blessed. And so Moses, he's retelling this next generation. He's saying there was a time when God was working and he came down to Mount Sinai and he said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. May we be able to say what the Apostle Paul said, for me to live is Christ. Not for me to live as my wife, for me to live as my spouse, not for me to live as through my children. Yes, we love these individuals. Yes, we serve them, but Christ ought to have the supreme reign in our life. And so, what does that mean? How do we begin to practically kind of flesh that out? Well, it means that we ought to align our life around one consuming passion for the Lord. See, after 40 years of wandering, the little ones whose parents had tried to protect them are now being asked to risk in obedience. I want you to ponder this for a moment. Those that were little ones, their parents said, hey, no, I gotta take care of my children. You know, this is scary times. Now they're at the precipice some 40 years later, and Moses is saying, I want you to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your might. And by the way, there's still giants over there. There's still massive fortified cities over there. I don't know about you. Our world hasn't gotten any easier to live for God. Raising the next generation has not become any easier. And the call for us is still to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our might. These kids, their parents didn't do it. They suffered, but now they're having the same opportunity to align their life with a passion to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. Aligning your life isn't simply just prioritizing. It's not simply just trying to balance things. You know, I've been told all the time, hey, if you can just learn to kind of balance your family and balance living for the Lord, you know, that's never really worked for me. And the reason why it's never worked for me is if you think of a balance, literally they're at odds with one another. And I'll be honest with you, I don't want my family to be at odds ever with the Lord. They're on opposite sides. No. You need to align your life with this passion. And so how do we do that? Turn back to Deuteronomy 6 if you're hopefully you're still there. Deuteronomy chapter 6. How do we practically do this? Look at verse number 6. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. What were the words? To love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Okay? It's got to sink down. It's got to get down into your heart. You can't just hear it. It's got to get down into your heart. Look at verse number 7. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. You know what it is? We're talking. We are in a sense of family communication, but let me just apply it to everybody. It's just communication in your life. Do not let your love for the Lord and your work for the Lord and your giving for the Lord, don't let it remain private. Allow it to be a part of your everyday conversation with people around it. Talk about it with your family. Open up your heart to them. So oftentimes people will have a response, well, hey, you know what? My worship is a private thing. Not according to this. Moses is like, hey, no, listen. Hey, your children, and let me apply it to everybody, those that are in your life, they need to see your worship. They need to hear your worship. They've got to see the passion of your heart. What drives you? Those around you ought to see you. And listen, Moses is not simply talking about how you ought to, be talking about the 10 Commandments, every single time you're at dinner. That's not what he's saying. Moses isn't saying, at every dinner table you need to talk about thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal. However, those are good conversations to have. He's primarily talking about the first commandment here. Moses is saying, hey, you know what? They need to see what is the love and the passion in your heart and in your life. Why do we live this way? Talk about it. Can I encourage you not to allow every single dinner table to be a talk about what happened at work that day? It's hard not for it to be about that. I get it. But instead, talk about the Lord. Talk about the passions that are in your heart. And that's why in verse number 6, it's got to get deep down in your heart. So that way it can flesh itself out to those that are around you. Look at verse number 8. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. So a hand is a means of action. When you're walking out your door, you're getting ready to go out into life. You're getting ready to go out and do life. All right? Let this love for the Lord that's in your heart, that has now become a conversation of your lifestyle, to be put into practice through your commitments, through your choices, and through your service unto the Lord. Bring your children increasingly into the great consuming passion of your life. Bring your friends, bring the ones that you're doing life with into this journey. Let them be a part of it. Let them see it. Allow them to participate in it. The parents who said we cannot enter into the land because of our children, they actually led their children into the desert. And these parents later on, they say, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And they enter into promise. They enter into blessing. But let me close by this. So that was all introduction. I think it's the longest introduction I've ever had. Let the gospel explain the passion of your life. Let the cross be the explanation. As you live with one consuming passion for the Lord, your life, hear me, will provoke questions. Your life will need explaining. Because if we radically live for the Lord, while we're on the job, while we're everywhere we're at, while we're going through COVID, while we're going through endless fires and smokes and just all these things, as we're going through that, your life will require an explanation for why you're living the way you're living. Now, can I say quickly, I didn't say this to Dustin's church because he's not our church. But if you're just melting into the crowd, no one's going to ask. If we're not wanting to stand out for the Lord, if we're not wanting to be radically visible for the cause of Christ, no one is going to ask. But if we live radically, if we live counterculture, different, remaining in joy. Why? Because God's given us a song in the night, even in the struggle of the world in which we're living right now, questions will be asked. And listen, Moses doesn't say, if the children are going to ask here. Look at verse number 20 again. And when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, what mean the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments which the Lord our God hath commanded you? See, if you love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, the question will be asked. Mom, Dad, friend, whatever, why do you go to church so much? Why do you brave even smoky air? And again, someone that's watching online, I don't mean that's in no way to take a shot at you. We are 100% supportive of you. But why? Well, why this? Why that? Mom, Dad, why do we have so many people in our home? Why do we read our Bible so much? Why do we have family devotions? Why? Other families aren't like us. Man, our other friends, they're not like you. Why? And it'd be so easy to jump from the question that's found in verse number 20 of why do we do this? Why do we live for the Lord? Or in this text, why do we keep these laws? It'd be so easy to jump to verse 24. Look at verse 24. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God. It is so easy to jump, especially as a parent. A child asks us, why do we have to do this? Because the Lord tells us to. Because we have to. Christian life stinks, we have to. Right? Sometimes that's our responses. So easy to do that. But we get to the Lord's command after we see the Lord who redeems. Look at verse 21. Then thou shalt say unto thy son, we were Pharaoh's bondmen in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders great and sore upon Egypt and upon Pharaoh and upon all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from thence, out of Egypt, that he might bring us in to give us a land which he sware unto our fathers. He's talking about the promised land there. Mom, Dad, why are you living with this consuming passion of your life? A friend comes to you. Why are you so different? Tell them that we used to be slaves in Egypt. But the Lord brought us out with his mighty hand. Son, if it were not for the Lord, I would have been a slave to sin forever. But Christ redeemed me. Christ gave me a new hope. Christ took me from that old man of sin, and he has given me a new hope and a new life, an inheritance that cannot be touched. So let me say this, and then I'm almost done. The meaning of the law is to be found in the gospel. The meaning of the law is to be found in the gospel. Because even in the Old Testament, God was calling parents, God was calling us to do more than just teach the next generation a moral code. It's all about loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and all of your might. It is far, I want every parent to hear me real quick, it is far deeper than morality. It's far deeper than, hey, we got a bunch of good kids. No, we want it to be a love. We want it to be radically transformed from the inside out. When they ask these questions, tell them what the Lord has done for you. Tell them what the Lord means to you. Tell them that the Son of God, that He loved me, that He gave Himself for me, and that everything I have, all that I have, has been received of Him. Listen to me. The gospel is the very fuel for the why. Why do we do this? It's the very fuel because of what Christ has done for us. If we are all about just simply morality, if we are all about just trying to grit our teeth and to do well, it's going to be so frustrating in a world in which we live. But if each of us will radically just shower ourselves daily, really kind of moment by moment, by the grace of God on our lives, it will extend the proper answer to why we do what we do. When people ask, what's the reason of the hope that lies within you? Or maybe your children come to you and they say, why do we do all of this? Well, the Lord says so. There's part of the answer. But that answer is far more powerful if you will start with the declarative nature of the gospel in your life and in my life. So live for your relationships, live for your family, live for your spouse, and you will lead those relationships into the desert. But you live for the Lord, live passionately for the Lord, you will lead those relationships into a land of blessing. I promise you. The natural inclination is so often to put a horizontal relationship above God, because that's what we can see. That's what we can kind of touch. That's kind of our everyday life. But if we will learn that vertically actually affects the horizontal relationships, we will yield to what God desires in our heart. Allow the passion of Christ, allow the cross to be the very definition for why you do what you do. I'm going to ask you to just bow your head there. We don't have any music.